Welcome back to chapter 12 of Momo. I hope you're enjoying listening to it because I'm enjoying reading it. It's really nice to have a way that I can connect to people who I'm not able to see at the moment and hopefully even connect to people I've never met before. It's really nice, and I hope wherever you are, whatever you're doing okay and enjoying the story. So, are you sitting comfortably? What is that? Sorry, I can't hear you. Are you sitting comfortably? No. Okay, well, just take a moment, get yourself comfortable, and then I'll start.
I'm lying comfortably, though.
Yeah. If you're lying comfortably, standing comfortably, sitting comfortably, that's great. And if you're not comfortable, don't worry. Hopefully listening to this will make you feel more comfortable.
Yeah, and I'm all snuggly. I'm ready to hear some more of this intriguing story.
Good. The Nowhere House. Momo was standing in the biggest room she'd ever seen. It was bigger than the biggest cathedral or concert hall in the world. Massive columns supported a roof that could be sensed rather than seen in the gloom far above. There were no windows anywhere. The golden light that wove its way across this immense hall came from countless candles, whose flames burned so steadily that they looked like daubs of brilliant paint, requiring no wax at all to keep them alight. The thousand-fold whirring and ticking and humming and chiming that Momo had heard on entering came from innumerable clocks of every shape and size. They reposed on long tables, in glass cabinets, on golden wall brackets, on endless rows of shelves. There were dainty, bejeweled pocket watches, cheap tin alarm clocks, hourglasses, musical clocks with pirouetting dolls on top, sundials, clocks encased in wood and marble, glass clocks, clocks driven by jets of water. On the walls hung all manner of cuckoo clocks and other clocks with weights and pendulums, some swinging slowly and majestically, others wagging busily to and fro. All around the room, as at first floor level, ran a gallery reached by a spiral staircase. Higher still was another gallery, and above it another, and above that yet another. Clocks were standing or hanging everywhere. Momo looked. Not only conventional clocks, but spherical timepieces showing what time it was anywhere in the world, and sidereal clocks, large and small, complete with sun, moon, and stars. Arrayed in the middle of the hall were countless bigger clocks, a forest of clocks, as it were, ranging from grandfather clocks to full-sized church clocks. Not a moment passed, but one of these innumerable clocks pieces struck or chimed somewhere or other. Each of them showed a different time. Far from offending the ear, they combined to produce a sound as pleasant and harmonious as the rustle of leaves in a wood in springtime. Momo roamed from place to place, gazing wide-eyed at all of these curiosities. She had paused beside a lavishly ornamented clock on which two tiny dancers, a man and a woman, were standing with hands intertwined, and was just about to prod them to see if they would move when she heard a friendly voice behind her. "Ah, so you're back, Cassiopeia," it said. "Did you bring Momo with you?" Turning, Momo looked along an avenue between the grandfather clocks and saw a frail old man with silvery hair stooping over the tortoise. He was wearing a golden embroidered frock coat, blue silk knee breeches, white hose, and shoes with big gold buckles. Lace frothed from the cuffs and collar in his coat, and his silver hair was braided into a pigtail at the back. Momo had never seen such a costume before, though anyone less ignorant would at once have recognized it as the height of fashion 2 centuries earlier. "Well," said the old gentleman, still bending over the toys, "is she here?" "Where is she, then?" He donned a small pair of eyeglasses like Beppo's, except that these were gold-rimmed, and peered about him. "Here I am," called Momo. The old gentleman came towards her with a beaming smile, both hands extended, and the nearer he drew, the younger he seemed to become. By the time he had reached Momo's side, seized her hands and shaken them cordially, he looked little older than her herself. "Welcome," he said delightedly. "Welcome to Nowhere. Nowhere House. Permit me to introduce myself. My name is Hora, Professor Secundus Minutus Hora." "Were you really expecting me?" Momo asked in surprise. "But of course. Why else would I have sent Cassiopeia to fetch you?" He produced a diamond-studded fob watch from his pocket and flipped the lid open. "In fact, you're uncommonly punctual," he said with a smile, holding out the watch for her inspection. There were no hands, no numerals on the watch face, Momo saw, just 2 very fine superimposed spirals rotating slowly in opposite directions. Every now and again, minute dots of light appeared where the spirals intersected. "This watch," said Professor Hora, "is known as a chrysomograph. It actually records chrysomograph. It actually records crisis in the history of mankind, and one of these rare occurrences has just begun." "What, a crisis?" asked Momo. "It's like this," the professor explained. "At certain junctions in the course of existence, unique moments occur when everyone and everything, even the most distant stars, combine to bring about something that could not have happened before and will never happen again. Few people know how to take advantage of these critical moments, unfortunately, and they often pass unnoticed. When someone does recognize them, however, great things happen in the world. Perhaps one needs a watch like yours to recognize them," said Momo. Professor Hora smiled and shook his head. "No, my child, the watch by itself would be of no use to anyone. You have to know how to read it as well." He snapped the watch shut and replaced it in his pocket. Then, noticing Momo's ill-concealed surprise at his personal appearance, he looked down at himself and frowned. "Ah," he said, "you may be punctual, but I seem to be rather behind the times, in fashion. I mean, how unobservant of me. I must put that right at once." And he clicked his fingers. In a flash, his costume changed to a black frock coat, stovepipe trousers, and a stand-up collar. "Is that better?" he inquired doubtfully, but Momo's look of astonishment was answer enough in itself. "No, of course not," he went on quickly. "What am I thinking of?" Another click of his fingers, and he instantly appeared in an outfit the like of which Momo had never seen, nor had anyone else since it dated from 100 years in the future. "Still no good?" he said. "Never mind. I'll get it right in the end." He clicked his fingers a third time. At long last he stood there, attired in an ordinary suit of the kind men wear today. "That's more like it, eh?" he said, eyes twinkling. "I hope I didn't alarm you, Momo. It was just a little joke of mine. But now, my girl, come with me. You've a long journey behind you, and I'm sure you'd enjoy a hearty breakfast." He took her by the hand and led her off into the clock forest, with the toys following at their heels. After twisting and turning like a maze, the path eventually came out in a small room whose walls consisted of gigantic grandfather clocks. In one corner stood a bow-legged table, and beside it a dainty little sofa and some matching armchairs. Here, as elsewhere, everything was bathed in a golden glow of myriad motionless candle flames. Set out on the table were a pot-bellied jug and two small cups, together with plates, spoons, and knives, all of solid gleaming gold. There were also two little dishes, one containing golden yellow butter, the other honey, like liquid gold, and a basket piled high with crusty golden brown rolls. Professor Horror filled both cups with hot chocolate from the pot-bellied jug and made a gesture of invitation. There, little Momo, please tuck in. Momo needed no second bidding. Chocolate you could drink she'd never heard of before. As for rolls spread with butter and honey, they were a rare delicacy, and these rolls tasted more delicious than she'd ever eaten in all her life. Completely wrapped up in her wonderful breakfast, she feasted on it, with her cheeks bulging and her mind devoid of every other thought. Although she hadn't slept a wink all night long, the food banished her weariness and made her feel fresh and lively. The more she ate, the better it tasted. She felt as if she could have gone on eating like this for days on end. Professor Horror, who watched her benevolently, was tactful enough not to cut short her enjoyment too soon by engaging in conversation. He realized that his guest had years of hunger to make up for. Perhaps this was why, while watching her, he gradually looked older and older until he became a white-haired old gentleman again. When he noticed that Momo wasn't too handy with a knife, he spread the rolls for her and put them on her plate. He himself ate little, just enough to keep her company. At last, even Momo could eat no more. She drank up her chocolate, studying her host over the rim of her golden cup, and wondering who or what he could possibly be. He was no ordinary person, that much was obvious, but all she really knew about him so far was his name. She put her cup down and cleared her throat. "Why did you send the toys to fetch me?" "To protect you from the men in grey," Professor Horror replied gravely. "They're searching for you everywhere, and you're only safe from them here with me." Momo looked startled. "You mean they want to hurt me?" "Yes, my child," the professor sighed in a manner of speaking. "But why?" "Because they're afraid of you, because no one could have done them greater harm." "I haven't done anything to them," Momo protested. "Oh, yes, you have. You not only persuaded one of them to betray himself, you told your friends about him. What's more, you and your friends tried to broadcast the truth about the men in grey. Isn't that enough to make you their mortal enemy?" "But we walked right through the city, the tortoise and I," Momo said. "If they were searching for me everywhere, they could have easily caught us. We weren't going fast." The tortoise had stationed herself at the professor's feet. He took her on his lap and tickled her under the chin. "Well, Cassiopeia," he said with a smile, "what's your opinion? Could they have caught you?" The word "never" appeared like lightning on Cassiopeia's shell, and the letters flickered so merrily that Momo almost thought she detected a dry little chuckle. "The thing is," said the professor, "Cassiopeia can see into the future, Not far, just half an hour thereabouts, but still. Correction, flashed the shell. Pardon me, said the professor. I should have said half an hour precisely. She knows for certain what will happen in the next 30 minutes, like whether or not she's going to bump into the men in grey, for instance. My goodness, exclaimed Momo. How useful! So if she knew in advance she'd meet the men in grey at such and such a spot, would she simply take a different route? No, Professor Horror replied. I'm afraid it's not as easy as that. She can't undo anything she knows in advance because she knows what is actually going to happen. If she knew she was going to meet the men in grey at a certain spot, she'd meet them there. She'd be powerless to prevent it. Momo's face fell. I don't understand, she said. In that case, there's no advantage in knowing anything in advance at all. There is sometimes, said the professor. In your case, for example, she knew you were going to take a certain route and not meet any men in grey. That was an advantage, wasn't it? Momo didn't reply. Her thoughts were as tangled as a skein of wool. But to return to you and your friends, the professor went on, I must congratulate you. Your posters and placards were most impressive. You mean you read them? Momo asked delightedly. Every last word, the professor assured her. Nobody else did from the look of it, said Momo. The professor nodded sympathetically. I'm afraid not. The men in grey saw to that. Do you know them as well? Momo asked. He nodded again and sighed. I know them as well as they know me, he said. Momo didn't know what to make of this reply. Do you often see them? No, never. I never set foot outside this house. What about the men in grey? Do they ever come here? The professor smiled. Never fear, Momo. They can't get in. They couldn't even if they knew the way to Never Lane, which they don't. Momo thought a while. Though reassured by Professor Horror's remarks, she was eager to learn more about him. How do you come to know all of this? She asked. I mean, about our posters and the men in grey. I keep a constant watch on them and everything connected with them, the professor told her. So I've naturally been watching you and your friends as well. I thought you said you never left the house. I've no need to, said the professor rapidly, growing younger again as he spoke, thanks to my omnivision glasses. He took off his little gold-rimmed spectacles and held them out. Would you care to try them on? Momo put them on. I can't make out anything at all, she said, screwing up her eyes and blinking. All she could see was a whirl of colours, lights and shadows. It made her feel positively dizzy. Yes, she heard the professor say, it's always the same to begin with. Seeing through omnivision glasses isn't as easy as all that. You'll soon get used to them, though. He stood behind Momo's chair and gently adjusted the position of the frame. At once, everything sprang into focus. The first thing Momo saw was the men in grey with their little limousines on the edge of the district where the strange white buildings began. They were in the process of pushing their cars backwards. Then, looking further afield, she saw more grey figures in the city streets. They were talking and gesticulating excitedly, as though passing on information of some kind. It's you they're talking about, Professor Horror explained. They can't understand how you managed to escape. Why are they all so grey in the face? Momo asked, still watching them. Because they feed on dead matter, the professor told her. They live in people's time, as you know, but time dies, literally dies. Once it has been wrested away from its rightful owners. All human beings have their own share of time, but it survives only for as long as it really belongs to them. So the men in grey aren't human? Nope, their human appearance is only a disguise. What are they then? Strictly speaking, they're nothing. So, where do they come from? They exist only because people give them the opportunity to do so. Naturally, they seize that opportunity. Now that people are given them a chance to rule their lives, they're naturally taking advantage of that too. What would happen if they couldn't steal any more time? They'd disappear into thin air, which is where they come from. Professor Horror took his glasses back and pocketed them. Unfortunately, he continued with a pause, they already have plenty of human accomplices. That's the worst part. Well, nobody's going to steal any of my time, Momo said stoutly. I should hope not, said the professor. From one moment to the next, he looked like an old man again. Come along, Momo. I want to show you my collection. Taking her by the hand, he led her back into the great hall, where he showed her all sorts of timepieces and made them chime for her, explained the workings of his sidereal clocks, and gradually, under the influence of his little visitor's obvious delight in all these marvels, grew younger and younger again. Tell me, he said, as they walked on, do you like riddles? Oh, yes, very much, Momo said eagerly. Do you know any? Yes, said Professor Horror, smiling at her. I know a real teaser. Very few people can solve it. All the better, Momo said. I'll make a special note of it so I can try it out on my friends. The professor's smile broadened. I can't wait to see if you can solve it. Listen carefully. Listen carefully. All dwelling in one house are strange brothers free, as unlike as any free brother could be. Yet try as you may to tell brother from brother, you'll find that the trio resemble each other. The first isn't there, though he'll come beyond doubt. The second departed, so he's not about. The third and the smallest is right on the spot, and manage without him the others could not. Yet the third is a factor with which to be reckoned, because the first brother turns into the second. You cannot stand back and observe number 3, for one of the others is all you could see. So tell me, child, are the 3 of them one? Or are they but 2, or could there be none? Just name them, and you will at once realize that each rules a kingdom of infinite size. They rule it together and are it as well, in that they're alike. So where do they dwell? You'll have to re-listen to that one. Professor Horror gave Momo an encouraging nod. Thanks to her excellent memory, she was able to repeat the whole rhyme word for word. She did so slowly and carefully, then sighed. Phew, she said, that's a really hard one. I've no idea what the answer could be. I don't even know where to start. Just try, said the professor. Momo recited the riddle again under her breath. Finally, she shook her head. It's no use, she said. The tortoise, which had now rejoined them and was seated at the professor's feet, had been watching Momo intently. Well, Cassiopeia, said the professor, you know everything half an hour in advance. Will Momo solve the riddle or won't she? Cassiopeia's shell lit up. She will. it spelled out. You see, the professor said, turning to Momo, you're going to solve it. Cassiopeia has never been wrong yet. Momo knit her brow and racked her brain once more. Who were these three brothers that all lived in the same house? They obviously weren't brothers in the usual sense. In riddles, brothers always meant grains of sand or teeth or the like, similar things at all events. But these three things somehow turned into each other. What sort of thing could do that? Looking around in search of inspiration, Momo caught sight of the candles with their motionless flames. Fire turned wax into light. Yes, they were three brothers, but that couldn't be the answer because they were all there at the same time, and two of them weren't supposed to be. What about blossom or fruit and seed? Could the answer be something of that kind? The more Momo debated this possibility, the more promising it seemed. The seed was the smallest of the three. It was there when the others weren't, and the other two couldn't exist without it. But no, that wouldn't do either. The seed was perfectly visible, and the riddle said that anyone looking at the smallest of the three brothers always saw one of the other two. Looking, yeah, saw one of the other two. Momo's thoughts flitted hither and thither. She simply couldn't find a clue that led anywhere. I think it's got something to do with time. Still, Cassiopeia had predicted that she would solve the riddle, so she slowly recited it to herself for a third time. When she came to the line, the first isn't there, though he'll come beyond doubt, she saw Cassiopeia give her a wink. The words, what I know, lit up on her shell, but only for a split second. Professor Hora smiled. No helping, Cassiopeia, he said, though he hadn't been looking in her direction. Momo can work it out all by herself. Momo, who had seen the words, began to ponder their meaning. What was it that Cassiopeia knew? She knew the future. So it's something to do with past, present, and future, I'm sure. The future, cried Momo. The first isn't there, though he'll come beyond doubt. That's the future. Professor Hora nodded. The second departed, moments went on, so he is not about. That must be the past. And Professor beamed at her and nodded again. Now comes the hard part, Momo said thoughtfully. What can the third brother be? He's the smallest of the three, but the other two can't manage without him. So that he's the now, isn't he? The present. And when you look at the present, you always either see the past or the future. And he is the only one at home. After another pause, she thought. She gave a sudden exclamation. Of course, it's the now, this very moment. The past consists of moments gone by and the future moments to come, so neither of them could exist without the present. That's it. Her cheeks were glowing with excitement now. But what does the next bit mean? Yet the third is a factor with which to be reckoned. That's the now. Because the first brother turns into the second. The past turns into the future. I suppose it means the present exists only because the future turns into the past. She looked at Professor Hora with dawning amazement. Yes, it's true. I'd never looked at it like that before. If it is true, though, there's really no such thing as the present, past, or future. Take this moment, for instance. By the time I talk about it, it's already the past. You cannot stand back and observe number 3 for for one of the others is all you can see. I understand that what that means now. I understand the rest too, because you could be forgiven for thinking there was only one brother. The present, I mean, or only the past or the future, or none of them at all, because each of them exists only when the others do. Golly, it's enough to make your head spin. But the riddle isn't finished yet, said the professor. What's this kingdom the brothers all rule together, the one they themselves are? Momo looked baffled. Time? Momo looked baffled. What could it be? What did past, present, and future amount to? All lumped together, she gazed around the great hall with its thousands upon thousands of clocks. Suddenly her face lit up. Time. Yeah. She cried, Time! Clapping her hands and skipping with joy. That's what it is. Time! And the house the brothers live in, what would that be? The world, I suppose, Momo replied. Bravo, said the professor, clapping in his turn. I congratulate you, my girl. You're really good at solving riddles. I'm delighted. Me too, said Momo, secretly wondering why he should be quite so pleased that she'd solved his riddle. He showed her many other rare and interesting things as they resumed their tour of the clock-filled hall, but the riddle continued to occupy her thoughts. Tell me, she said eventually, what exactly is time? You've just found that out for yourself, the professor replied. No, she said, I mean time itself. It exists, so it must be something. What is it really? The professor smiled. It would be nice if you worked out your own answer to that question too. Momo pondered for a long time. It exists, she mused. That much I know, but you can't touch it or hold it. Could it be something like perfume? Then again, it's always passing by, so it must come from somewhere. Perhaps it's like the wind. No, wait. Perhaps it's a kind of music you just don't hear because it's always there. She paused, then added, though I have heard it sometimes, I think very faintly. The professor nodded. I know that's why I was able to summon you here. But there must be more to it than that, said Momo, still pursuing her train of thought. The music comes from far off, but I seem to hear it deep inside me. Perhaps time works that way too. She broke off, bewildered. I mean, she said, like the wind making waves in the sea. She shrugged and shook her head. I expect I'm talking nonsense. Not at all, said the professor. I think you put it very prettily indeed. That's why I'm going to let you in to a secret. If you want to know, all the time in the world comes from here, from Nowhere House, Never Lane. Momo gazed at him in awe. I see, she said softly. You mean you make it yourself? The professor smiled again. No, my child, I'm merely its custodian. All human beings have their allotted span of time. My task is to see that it reaches them. In that case, Momo said, why not simply arrange things so they don't have any more of it stolen by the time thieves? I can't, the professor told her. What people do with their time is their own business. They must guard it themselves. I can only distribute it. Momo looked around the great hall. Is that why you keep all those clocks? One for every person in the world? No, Momo, these clocks are just a hobby of mine. They're very imperfect copies of something that everyone carries inside him or her. Just as people have eyes to see light with and ears to hear sound with, so they have hearts for the appreciation of time. And all the time they fail to appreciate it as it fail to appreciate is as wasted on them as colours of the rainbow are wasted on a blind person, or a nightingale's song on a deaf person. Some hearts are unappreciative to time, I fear, though. They beat like all the rest. What will happen when my heart stops beating? Momo asked. When that moment comes, said the professor, time will stop for you as well, or rather, you will retrace your steps through time, through all the days and nights, months and years of your life, until you go out through the great round silver gate you entered by. What will I find on the other side? The home of the music you've sometimes faintly heard in the distance. But by then you'll be part of it. You yourself will be a note in its mighty harmonies. Oh, that's nice. Professor Hora looked at Momo searchingly. But I don't suppose that makes much sense to you, does it? Yes, said Momo, I think so. Then, retracing her strange progress along Never Lane and the way she'd lived through everything in reverse, she asked, Are you deaf? The professor smiled. If people knew the nature of death, he said after a moment's silence, they'd cease to be afraid of it. And if they ceased to be afraid of it, no one could rob them of their time any more. Why not tell them? Momo suggested. I already do, said the professor. I tell them the meaning of death with every hour I send them, but they refuse to listen. They'd sooner heed those who frighten them. That's another riddle in itself. I'm not frightened, said Momo. Professor Hora nodded slowly. He gave her another searching stare. Then he said, Would you like to see where time comes from? Yes, she whispered. I'll take you there, said the professor, but only if you promise not to talk or ask any questions. Is that understood? Momo nodded. Professor Hora stooped and picked her up. All at once he seemed immensely tall and inexpressibly old, but not as an old man grows, more in the manner of an ancient tree or a primeval crag. Clasping Momo with one arm, he covered her eyes with his other hand, so gently that it felt as if snowflakes were landing on her cheeks like icy thistledown. Momo sensed that he was striding down a long, dark tunnel, but she felt quite safe and utterly unafraid. At first, she thought she could hear her own heartbeat, but then she became more and more convinced that they were really the echoes of the professor's footsteps. After what seemed a very long way, he put Momo down. His face was close to hers when he removed his hand from her eyes. He gave her a meaningful look and put a finger to his lips. Then he straightened up and stepped back. Everything was bathed in a sort of golden twilight. When her eyes became accustomed to it, Momo saw that she was standing beneath a mighty dome as big as the vault of heaven itself, and so it seemed to her that the whole of the dome was made of the purest gold. High overhead in the very centre of the dome was a circular opening through which a shaft of light fell straight on to an equally circular lake whose dark smooth waters resembled a jet-black mirror. Just above the surface, glittering in the shaft of light with the brilliance of a star, something was slowly and majestically moving back and forth. Momo saw that it was a gigantic pendulum, but one with with no visible means of support. Apparently weightless, it soared and swooped above the mirror-smooth water with bird-like ease. As the glittering pendulum slowly neared the edge of the lake, an enormous water lily bud emerged from the dark depths. The closer the pendulum came, the wider it opened, until at last it lay full blown on the surface. Momo had never seen so exquisite a flower. It was composed of all the colours of the spectrum, brilliant colours such as Momo had never dreamed of. While the pendulum hovered above it, she became so absorbed in the spectacle that she forgot everything else. The scent alone seemed something she had always craved without knowing what it was. But then, very slowly, the pendulum swung back, and as it did so, Momo saw to her dismay that the glorious flower was beginning to wilt. Petal after petal dropped off and sank into the blackness below. To Momo, it was as if something utterly dear to her were vanishing beyond recall. By the time the pendulum reached the centre of the lake, the flower had completely disintegrated. At that moment, however, a new bud rose near the opposite shore, and as the pendulum grew nearer, Momo saw that an even lovelier bloom was beginning to unfold. She walked around the lake to inspect it more closely. This new flower was altogether different from its predecessor. Momo had never seen such colours before, but these colours seemed richer and more exquisite by far. The petals too gave off a different and far more delicious scent, and the longer Momo studied them, the more marvellous in every detail she found them. But again the glittering pendulum swung back, and as it did so, the glorious blossom withered and sank, petal by petal, into the dark, unfathomable depths of the lake. Slowly, very slowly, the pendulum proceeded on its way, but not to exactly the same place as before. This time it checked its swing a little way further along the shore, and there, one pace from where it had previously paused, another bud arose and unfolded. To Momo it seemed the loveliest lily of all, the flower of flowers, a positive miracle. She could have wept aloud when this perfect blossom, too, began to fade and subside into the depths, but she remembered her promise to Professor Hora and uttered no sound. Meanwhile, the pendulum had returned to the opposite shore, another pace, further along, and a fresh bud broke the glassy surface. As time went by, it dawned on Momo that each new blossom differed entirely from those that had gone before, and that it always seemed the most beautiful of all. She wandered around the lake, watching flower after flower unfold and die. Although she felt she would never tire of this spectacle, she gradually became aware of another marvel, one that had escaped her until now. She could not only see the shafts of light that streamed down from the centre of the dome, she could hear it as well. At first it reminded her of wind whistling in distant tree tops, but the sound swelled until it resembled the roar of a waterfall or the thunder of waves breaking on a rocky shore. More and more clearly Momo perceived that this mighty sound consisted of innumerable notes whose constant changes of pitch were forever weaving different harmonies. It was magic, yet it was also something else. All at once she that it as the recognized it as the faraway music she had sometimes faintly heard while listening to the silence of a starry night. But now, as the sound became even clearer and more glorious, she sensed that it was the resonant shaft of light that summoned each bud from the dark depths of the lake and fashioned it into a flower of unique, inimitable beauty. The longer she listened, the more clearly she could make out individual voices. No human voices, but notes such as might have been given forth by gold and silver, and every other precious metal in existence. And then beyond them, as it were, voices of quite other kind made themselves heard, infinitely remote yet indescribably powerful. As they gained strength, Momo began to distinguish words uttered in a language she had never heard before, but could nonetheless understand. The sun and the moon and the planets and stars were telling her their own true names. Their names signified what they did and how they all combined to make each our lily flower and fade in turn. Suddenly, Momo realized that all of these words were directed at her. From where she stood to the most distant star in space, the entire universe was focused upon her, a, sing- her, a single face of unimaginable size, looking at her and talking to her. What overcame her then was something more than fear. A moment later, she caught sight of Professor Horror silently beckoning to her. She ran to him and buried her face in his chest. Taking her in his arms, he put one hand over her eyes. As before, light as thistledown, and carried her back along the endless tunnel. Again all seemed dark, but again she felt snug and secure. Once they were back in the little clock-lined room, he laid her down on a sofa. "Professor Horror," she whispered, "I never knew that anyone's time was so—" She strove to find the right word, but in vain. "So big," she said eventually. "What you've just seen and heard wasn't everyone's time," the professor replied. "It was only your own. There's a place like the one you visited in every living soul, but only those who let me take them there can reach it, nor can it be seen with ordinary eyes." "So where was I?" "In the depths of your own heart," said the professor gently, stroking her tousled hair. "Professor Horror," she whispered again, "may I bring my friends to see you too?" "No," he said, "not yet. That isn't possible." "How long can I stay with you then?" "Until you feel it's time to rejoin your friends, my child." "But may I tell them what the stars were saying?" "You may, but you won't be able to." "Why not?" "Because before you can, the words must take root inside you." "But I want to tell them, all of them. I want to sing them what the voices sang. Then everything would come right again, I think." "If that's what you really want, Momo, you must learn to wait." "I don't mind waiting. I mean wait like a seed that must slumber in the earth before it can sprout. That's how long the words will take to grow up inside you. Is that what you want?" "Yes," she whispered. "Then sleep," said Professor Horror gently, passing his hand across her eyes. "Sleep." And Momo heaved a deep, contented sigh and fell asleep.
Wonderful.
I hope you enjoyed that. Um, I could hear in the background some little snoring sounds, so I think maybe some of you fell asleep. So you might have to re-listen to that chapter because it was a really amazing chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. Join me again for part 3 of the book, chapter 13. Loads of love. Take care. Look after yourselves and stay connected.